So I'm Shishir. I'm at the Ashank Desai Centre for Policy Studies. Previously, I was at the School of Management, shifted about 4 years back. Um, so, if I were to kind of characterize, something that works in the classroom, um, one thing that it may sound counterintuitive or may not, but one thing that works for me is that how does one make, particularly in a policy kind of context, right? How does one make particularly students fairly um, relaxed, right? Relaxed in the sense, I'll tell you in a minute why that's important. Um, so humor helps a lot in the sense that see, at the end of the day, in a policy context, what is critical is how does one begin to create arguments about so many things, whether it's welfare or whether it's access to services, housing, whatever it is, right? And for me, one realization, obviously through my own engagement during my PhD time, etc. But one thing one has begun to realize is that students, we're all surrounded by several things that shape our identity, and many of those assumptions about life, etc., is kind of implicit, woven into a very fabric of the way we think about the world. So how does one make that implicit set of assumptions more explicit? Right? And there's no one right way to do it. There's no one right sort of destination either. But that process is also very fascinating and interesting. That the kind of internal set of assumptions about several things, as I said earlier, on policy-related issues, but even otherwise, politics, etc. So in the classroom, two things work. One, as I said, is if they can talk about their own personal experiences, about, for instance, just look at air pollution, for instance. Right? On the one hand, there's a desire to have cleaner air, right? But on the other hand, there's also a need to have your personal sort of transport. Right? At some level, there's a tension between the two. Right? Thousands of us taking our own personal transport to various places, me included perhaps, right, creates a collective problem. So how does one engage with these kinds of relatively not easily tractable problems, right? Intractable. There are no easy solutions in public policy. But making students think more deeply rather than them wanting to react to what the instructor wants to hear. Right? That's the game that one has to try and completely avoid. That students are telling me what I want to hear. Right? So how does one prevent that? And that's right. So coming back to the issue is how does one make people, students particularly, relaxed? Humor works a lot because they feel that it's a space where I think they can, share some deeper anguish or anxieties, worries, whatever it is. Right? And so that has worked to some extent in my classes. I think I try to create that atmosphere. The second thing that I think is very crucial, which was a steep learning curve for my PhD time, is the writing is one of the best tools on the intellectual shelf. How does one really get students to take that seriously and write about their all those issues, concerns, anxieties, problems, right? And the articulation of that is something I found very enriching for students to do. Now it's even more trickier whether ChatGPT interferes with that or not. I'm, for instance, a bit more skeptical to give assignments, to take home assignments. I'm a bit worried about it. Um, and the last point I'd make is that the classroom is, for me, a very rich cultural and historical context. So all individual students bring with them very rich kinds of issues with them, and how does that intersect with, a set of issues that one is discussing in a public policy context, right? So the intersection of that, the intermingling of that is very crucial. I mean, if you can bring that out, whatever may be the response of the student at the end of the course, I find that quite a fulfilling exercise to do
Understood. I have a question. It's kind of a fun, a conundrum in the classroom, right? They're not appeasing to what we want to hear. But I feel students are trying through this schooling to appease, to ensure they aren't wrong, rather than to kind of put that away. And 16 weeks, if like in my department, EACD, we do a lot of half semester courses, so we share burden. 7 weeks is not enough to get them out of that mode of appeasement. It's much more challenging as a younger female faculty, because that, they think we are more guarded often than we sometimes are. So are there
what do you do?
I laugh a lot. My classrooms are boisterous. They're loud, boisterous, because I want to enjoy my teaching. So I try to get them to talk about to each other. They're allowed to go trick other, formulae help. Oh, you got this unit, did the other person get the same dimensions? So we do that a lot, but it takes them, so unless they've taken a semester or two with me, they're trying to appease to me rather than respond collectively. And I've had the privilege of teaching my undergrads over multiple semesters, but that's not always true with most students. So do you have any kind of tricks in your hat about stopping them to get from getting into the appeasement mode? And this is true for PhD mentoring too. It's like they're trying to rewire how they're approaching mentorships as the mentee. So do you have anything that you explicitly?
Good question. There's no real, good trick per se. But what becomes interesting is that if the classroom discussions are of a particular kind, right, and you begin to understand, I don't have large classrooms, so that's an advantage obviously. But so if one begins to understand each student individually, what they say in the class, how they engage, and what appears on their, printed response, as if there's quite a gap, one understands that something is amiss. So the classroom for you in your own way, but for classroom is really an interesting space to really kind of jump into ideas and not be seen to having any particular sort of, how should one say, final version of what it means to have a particular policy, right? So there is no, say, politically correct answer that I want to give. Right? So that is always something that I do not want to present to them. But the engagement in the class becomes a very interesting point, and that gives me a clue about how they're going to perhaps respond. So if there's a gap there, one notices that gap.